Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, debunking mythology. Sat means truth, logos means a study or science, Sattology means a science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means a science or study of fake, lie, or imagination. Please don't use the word mythology for ancient Vedic scriptures. Vedic scriptures are not just ancient, they're current also. Current Vedic scriptures and Ramayana and Mahabharata and any history of Native Americans. Most of the history of natives is lost and is being told by Europeans to natives. It's like after we kill them, we tell them, "Oh, you are so great people." This post-mortem appreciation is not good. That kills the civilization. It's an insult. So if you are belonging to a European background person and you know that your ancestors have done something wrong, admit it and help financially in supporting those who are trying to revive the history of the natives. People like at our group, Sattology, we do that extensively. So I have my very good friend, brother, and Rishi, Muni, and many other adjectives you can give him. So I did brother over there today. So those of you who'd like to add that to their lexicon, please do that. So let us welcome Sri Nilesh Nilkant Oak.
Namaste, Aditya ji.
So, Nilesh, when we talk about prisoners of success, prisoners of failure, and there is another thing is also the life of truth. We have been discussing truth science. We did Adhyatma part 1, part 2. Well, it is quote part 2 and part 1, but now we are covering the part 3 today. So what is the life of a truth?
Okay, that's a good question. For example, if you take Shankaracharya's model, he talks about the ultimate reality as a one reality, one truth, right? But then he also talks about like a temporary truth. Okay, so for example, when he says like Brahma Satya Jagad Mithya, he uses the word Mithya there, Brahma Satya Jagad Mithya. The Jagan Mithya, he's saying this Jagat, this creation is a Mithya. The sense of Mithya is very different. It's not saying it's false. He's using the word Mithya in the sense of temporary. Okay, so that's one side of it. Many of the mantra in that people are aware, people chant, it comes in Upanishad. Usually when in the mantra the word satya comes, okay, so for example, if you take Atharva Shirsha from Atharva Veda, so it will begin something like Hari Om Namaste Ganapataye Tomeva Pratyaksham Tattvamasi Tomeva Kevalam Kartasi Tomeva Kevalam Dhartasi Tomeva Kevalam Hartasi Tomeva Sarvam Khalvidam Brahmasi. So it's describing the Jagat actually, Tom Sakshad Atmasi Nityam Rutham Vachmi, Satyam Vachmi. So this is the answer to that. So it says Rutham Vachmi, speak the right truth or speak in the right way. Satyam Vachmi, speak the truth. So now what is the difference between Rutham and Satyam? So both are actually truthful. Both are truth. Rutham means the right knowledge. Satyam means true knowledge or right knowledge. So what's the difference? The Rutham also you can connect with the Rutu in the season. So see, remember now that you can see the temporary nature of it. When right now we say the Vasanta Rutu or the spring season, it is a fact, but it is not a permanent fact. It is going to change. So certain truths are true for a certain period of time at a certain place and in the certain context. So what we call Desha Kala Patra. Time, place, and circumstances. So there are certain truths are to be understood in the context. Certain truths are eternal. They just never change. The nature of Atma will not change. But for example, the astronomy situation in the Mahabharata is not same as astronomy situation in Ramayana. But astronomy is truthful. Okay, so there are certain things that are true, but they're true for a temporary time. See, if we have a Latin American audience, or in the Spanish, for example, think of what they say, the soy and estoy. Okay, so something, so like something is true in a temporary fashion. Like I'm working for this company that is temporary, because there was a time when I was not working for that company, and there may be time in future when I'm not working for that company. But say something true about me, like my name is Nilesh or I am Nilesh, is kind of given for this lifetime at least, right? So that's the difference.
So the one more question comes here is like the when we say the life of truth, Satya, then there is a life of myth also, Sanskrit myth,
Mhm.
which is a which we regularly see getting debunked every day.
Yeah.
RN invasion theory, RN migration theory, you debunked, and you debunked many other theories, including the date and times of Mahabharata, also of many during different sources. So even the lie has a lifespan, but the Satya's lifespan is unlimited because it's never going to change. One plus one is equal to two is always going to remain the same, as in our experience. Now, in the today's we see that so many propagandas go to establish their version of the truth. We
Hmm.
we euphemistically call it narrative building. That I'm building a narrative.
Hmm.
We are trying to build an alternative narrative which is built on debunking. It's like a Naiti,
Hmm.
Naiti, trying to find the truth. So, what is the life of a lie?
As long as you see, just like in Shanti Parva, during the Yudhishthir Bhishma Samvad, like Bhishma says, so Bhishma is also asked that question, it's like why he did not speak out during the Draupadi Vastraharan, for example. And in that context, or even otherwise, in certain context, he's mentioning that the truth or the truth claim of a strong person is considered the truth. That's not to say that dharma, from a dharma point of view, that is the fact. But someone with a power, like someone in a sense of power, money, power, weapons, whatever, strength, physical strength, that person saying something, and even if he or she says something wrong, until the other people are capable of overpowering that person, they might have to live with it as if that is the truth, or at least not talk against the truth.
That's right.
So that's what happens.
So I think we can get started on this because gradually now we see all. This is the first time in USA we are talking about the presidential announcement says we will have food shortages,
Mhm.
and this is never heard before. You and I have never heard in this country, and people are surprised that this is the talk even at the presidential level did not happen in 1930s also when there was
Mhm.
recession.
Mhm.
So we are looking at a very dire state of the country as a whole, as a USA,
Yeah.
and it's a very small population as compared to other parts of the world, just 300 million people and sparsely populated. So maybe our sessions will help those who will feel the pains because somewhere you need the mind to be engaged.
Mhm. Yeah, and also get back to the simple ways of life.
Simple ways of
Okay, the
life.
native ways of life. See, what has happened is, if a catastrophe hits, the population which is going to feel the most effect of it is the American population,
That's right.
or the so-called developed countries, because we have created the kind of infrastructure where practically we are useless to survive in the natural world. Like in Mumbai, growing up in Mumbai, again a cosmopolitan city, the humor used to be who brings the milk or who gives the milk. Okay, and instead of kids giving, and it was a joke, of course, the answer like cow gives the milk, the person will take the name of a community which is to deliver the milk. So like us in north Indian like community was just like all the dabbawalas is like the Warkari community. Similarly, the doodh milk supply was under the sort of a control, or what you say, facilitated by North Indians, like it's a UP, Bihar kind of thing. So they are called bhaiya, sometime in a derogatory sense, although the meaning is originally good. So they will say bhaiya gives the milk. Okay, similarly in American context, like where does the food come from? If you, I mean, Mike Polans, he's a journalist at the University of California. He has written books on food, and omnivore's dilemma. And he talks about, he actually takes people into rural areas of America or into the mountains, actually collecting foodstuff, vegetables, mushrooms, and whatnot, and actually collecting those and cooking food from it. So to make them realize how much efforts, how much energy goes into it.
Goes into it.
Most of the Americans, I mean, at least in the cities, I would say, and farmers are really exploited. But the cities, like, they don't know. To them, the food comes from Kroger, and food comes from Publix, and food comes from this grocery store. They don't know beyond that what goes into it.
Yes.
So we are in America, we are the most unsuitable to face any catastrophe. And just the last point before I get into my subject, which is maybe very different than this. The problem that America, that president just referred to, the shortage of the food and whatnot. Yes, the bad policies, current bad policies related to Ukraine and all that, those are responsible for it. But in a way, this is in the works in a bad way for last 20-30 years. So actually many of those presidents, or in general American administration, has not spent time on really restoring America. Rather, they have just, the very few have spent their time exploiting in every possible way. There is no true investment of the kind. But anyways, let's consider this as Adhyatma versus Vigyan part 3. And just I will recap quickly, and then just get on with something that I have not covered. So here, now some people who have already seen some parts, they commented that sometimes it's not easy to see the mind mapping or free mind. I have increased the font, but I also want to add, Adityaji, that the idea is not that they have to see everything. I mean, they have to see everything because we are communicating with it. I'll quickly capture through the first 5-6 bullets where we were, so that people have a continuity for it. So I'll go fast through this. We began with Adhyatma and science or Vijnana. So Adhyatma, this is a definition given by my good friend Phadkeji. Again, Phadke and G, I am assigning G, and in this case, not in the sense of old. By the way, on that point, Adityaji, I must add that the word Vruddha, the Sanskrit word Vruddha, was used very similar fashion, the way it is understood in the Japanese culture. Right. For example, the Vruddha means of a old age, yes, but that is also associated with intelligent, a person full of wisdom.
Wisdom, that's right.
Right. And so I know that it's in the Japanese culture also, that sense is there. So yeah, which is to say, don't just go by the bombastic talk. Like, person has to go through the experience of life. Person has to go through the ups and downs cycles, the cycles of civilization, economic cycles, and life cycles, to become mature, to attain wisdom. So Vruddha is used in that sense.
Japanese, Aborigines, Maoris, South Americans, Europeans, Romanis, and original Europeans and original Native Americans were all Hindus before.
Yeah. And so that Vruddha, therefore you say, when you hear the word Vruddha Garga, and immediately a very crude translation by the Indologists and academics is like an old Garga. No, it's not an old Garga. It's a wise Garga. It is said in that sense, the Vruddha Garga and Vruddha Dhaumya, and you will see those words being used. Anyways, so Adhyatma is so for KG, when I'm saying, in a sense of a person with a very refined wisdom, Adhyatma is logically refined Shastra. That is how he gave a definition, and I love it. I mean, and Shastra, crudely translated as a science, we might say, logically refined Adhyatma. This is where we began, and this is to be understood, or this is to be applied in the context of a Satyam. Then, I'm going to go a bit fast through this because it has been covered in the previous one, which people will see. Now, how does this progress works? Whether it is in Adhyatma or whether it is in Vigyan. And by Vigyan, even I mean the modern science also, not to separate that. Modern science only has a somewhat reductionist view of a Shastra. Otherwise, it is very much part of it. The method is given as a P1 TT EE P2. Now, this is a formula of Sir Karl Popper, but the point is, that exist in our Vedic civilizational tradition, which is to say Bhagavad Gita, now that is 7,500 plus years old, part of Mahabharata. Many people made commentaries on Bhagavad Gita. Now, the recent or the latest, what do you call, not recent, the oldest existing commentary that we can think of is of Adi Shankaracharya. Now, does that mean Adi Shankaracharya is the first one to write a commentary? Absolutely not. I mean, he writes in his commentary itself, right? It's like a Vivruta Pada Padartha Vakyartha Nyayam Api. Like many people have analyzed this Bhagavad Gita from 1,000 different ways. Okay. Api, however, Durbo, it has become even more incomprehensible. In his time, he's talking. Because of multiple commentaries, if the people don't build their knowledge, they can find it confusing. The Mahabharata has a status of a Veda. And so if you consider that as a Shruti, then what does that mean? Shruti doesn't find the burden of multiple interpretations, because what we talked, Adityaji, today, the temporary truth or how long the truth is valid. The truth is valid, the eternal truth, there is something called Satyam Vachmi, but Rutham Vachmi means taking that Satya and presenting it in the context of a given time, place, and circumstances. That's what every Acharya does. For that particular time, it's for a medicine is a standard practice, Sattva, Raja, Tama, and Kapha, Vata, Pitta, all of that. But for that particular patient, right now, it may need to be fine-tuned in a certain way. So that's what Acharyas do. That's why there are multiple commentaries. So how does this progress? If it survives, the previous commentary survives, then they progress with something that a Shankaracharya wrote something, and then the next Acharya said, well, yeah, hold on, but people are finding this confusing because of this issue. So they wrote a commentary trying to elucidate that point. And then another Acharya may come and say, well, this person did a good job. However, he had, people are confusing this portion. That's what we're talking with the biggest, toughest unsolved problem by the previous theories. In this case, we can say in a Shastra jargon by previous Acharyas. Then a solution is proposed to solve the problem. That's why we have Adityaji, all these, of course, Nyaya Darshan, all the Darshana Shastras we see, but also with the commentaries. For example, if you take Shankaracharya and then Yamuna Muni and then Ramanujacharya and then Madhvacharya, right, making a commentary, then Vallabhacharya, Jnaneshwar, and you can just go on and on. In fact, what Eknath Maharaj done, he wrote a commentary on the 11th canto of Bhagavad Puran. But essentially, it's a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, if you see. And because there is that such a beautiful similarity, because 11th skanda of Bhagavad Puran is actually an expansion of Bhagavad Gita and additional commentary on Bhagavad Gita. And that can be easily shown to be true and so on. So a solution is proposed to solve the problem. Just a simple example, like Eknath Maharaj is considering himself to be a disciple of Jnaneshwar Maharaj. Tukaram Maharaj does the same thing. Now, the way 4 types of food, okay, Pachamannam Chaturvidham, so the 4 types of food is being digested, that fire, I am that fire, Krishna is saying in the Vibhuti Yoga. The way Jnaneshwar Maharaj explains it is not the way Eknath Maharaj explains it. Okay, it's a different. And today, suppose we have to talk about it, I may explain in another way. So, for example, Jnaneshwar, I will not go into those details, but Jnaneshwar talks in a certain 4 types of foods. Eknath Maharaj discusses in a different fashion. Today, if I have to say it, I can describe in a different fashion. In fact, I may say this in the terms of carbs, in the carbs and the proteins and the fats and the vitamins. I may say these 4 types of food. But that is not how Jnaneshwar Maharaj has described it. That is not how Eknath Maharaj has described it. What happens is our knowledge grows, our ability to validate certain things grows, and knowledge keeps on growing. That doesn't mean what they said is wrong, but now we have even a more evolved understanding of it. It adds to that knowledge. So a solution is proposed to solve the problem. Error elimination is achieved, not always, okay, by a lot of effort and by luck, via objectively testable evidence. Like today, we can talk about this, so the carbs, in what way they are different than proteins, and proteins are what way they're different than fats, and fats, what way they are different than vitamins or enzymes and whatnot. We can talk about the role of each in a different fashion. Successful solution leads to problem of higher complexity. That is the important point that is lost in all dogmatic traditions of the world. They say the best knowledge was there, in some book, in some by some person, who came to dictate this, or by some acharya, and nothing needs to be done, nothing should be done. This is the kind of dogmatic attitude you see around the world. Okay, exceptions none. But it's important to understand that a successful solution actually leads to a problem of higher complexity. It's a good thing. This is a leela. It is to be understood as a leela, like Krishna keeps on expanding. Every gopi feels that he's with him, that kind of thing. And the cycle repeats. Then the P2, the new problem, becomes the starting point. To solve that, you propose a theory, you attempt a error elimination. And if you are successful, then it's going to solve that problem, leads to a higher problem. We have gone through this, but I picked this. Then I picked up the Mahabharata as illustration. Specifically here, I'm going to talk about how my journey happened. Again, the idea is, the reason I'm emphasizing this is because, and few people get it, Adityaji, by the way. Jivan Rao, he says the great stuff about my books, of course, besides the dating of Mahabharata, dating of Ramayana, Bhishma Nirvana. Yeah, but he says that's great, but it appears to be actually not that important in comparison to the importance of my book is the methodology that I present, bringing the modern science, but even our ancient Adhyatma together, and how that approach is a unified, universal, wholesome approach to solve any problems. Okay, that's the approach of a Darshana Shastra also. Krishna is referring to that 13th chapter. Adhyatma Jnana Nityatvam Tattva Jnanartha Darshanam. Tattva Jnan and Darshanam. He is separating it out. Now, again, if you just take this line, you will find many interpretations of it. Adhyatma Jnana Nityatvam Tattva Jnanartha Darshanam. 13th chapter. Okay. So again, we are bringing this together in that fashion. So what was the problem there when I started? Now, I didn't quite start this way. I'll explain. But once I did it, so I started with this so-called Arundhati problem. So-called because that's no longer a problem. Okay, it has been solved by me in 2009. But that time nobody has done it. I started with this. When I solved it, I wanted to know how others had solved it, and I realized, to my dire surprise, I should say, shock in some ways, that all other Mahabharata researchers, with a few exceptions, the few exceptions will always be there, had simply ran away from it. Okay. So Arundhati Vasishta I solved. What did it do? It immediately, remember Adityaji, you mentioned just briefly, you mentioned Neti of a Yajnavalkya, and then also beautifully employed by Adi Shankara. And now Sir Karl Popper, falsificationism, And so what this showed is Arundhati Vasishta did not say where Mahabharata war happened, but it said definitely where it not happened. So anytime after 4500 OAD BC, which is last 6500 years, Mahabharata war is not possible. But also before 11,000 BC, so if you go beyond 13,000 years, it's not possible. Okay, so now Siddhartha Chabraji, I said another Hare Krishna devotee from Michigan area. After 10 years after my work, he wanted to test it. See, this is how it is. You start with a Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna, but you don't stop there. My congratulations to him. He said, let me check. And then he used a more precise data and actually found out that the interval for this epoch of Arundhati Yuga, in the context of Mahabharata war, is actually very precise. Okay, more precise than the one that I had figured out some 10 plus years ago. Now, what is again the beauty of this Arundhati Vasishta? It immediately, instantaneously destroyed, falsified 130 plus claims. Okay. Now, how did my journey begin? So that only gives me a 5,000 year long interval. Okay. But I have to select out of those one specific year. So again, I go back and said, are there any existing Mahabharata researchers? This is think of as a 2009. Who have proposed something which falls within this epoch of Arundhati. And there were 4 or 5 claims. I will not talk about the other claims because they were generic. Like one Mr. Modak had said around 5000 BC. You can see this description, by the way, in a book written by Lokmanya Tilak 130 years ago. Okay, that yeah, there were good number of people who were saying that Mahabharata war, mostly the Mahabharata evidence points to 5000 BC, but some of them were just giving approximate. There were two claims in 2009 which gave a specific year. One, Lele Shastri gave 5228 BC, Vartak gave 5561 BC. Now my claim, number of you now know that it's a 5561 BC. So now I'm using this, and I have done one episode already on this. So what's the difference between, say, Vartak and Oak? And Aditya ji has given a name, Vartak Oak Samvat, which is 5561 BCE, becomes a wonderful foundation for our Indian calendar for modernity, for 21st century. We call this Mahabharata Samvat. Many Panchanga makers are now understanding it. Many Sanskrit scholars have started understanding it. Many scientists, when I say many, that number is still very small, because this is not easy stuff. Okay, just because you have a degree doesn't mean you can do it. So 5561 forms a wonderful basis for it. And Aditya ji has given a name. What is it? Vartak Oak Samvat. So we'll talk about that sometime. But I want to show you. So yes, so Vartak has claimed something. So what is my contribution? Okay, that's what I wanted to discuss this. I have discussed some of them. One of the thing is Kartik Amavasya is the first day of war. Okay, many people have said this, but is there a official evidence? No, they were just simply taking it from a tradition, and nothing wrong to take a traditional claim and start from there. What is wrong, which is true for 90+% of Indic researchers, is they start with a tradition, but then they don't do anything. They just assume this is true. Another one is, if the tradition goes against their claim, they don't talk about it. If tradition supports them, then they will show, look, bhai, if the tradition is saying it, how can you say wrong? Which means they don't have a scientific acumen. Okay, they don't have a logical reasoning. They don't understand the nature of Adhyatma and Vigyan. They don't understand Darshana Shastra, and they do not understand the nature of a Sanatana civilization, which is Sanatano Nitya Nutana. Sanatana is not fearful of new truths coming to light. The truth is out there, but we may not know it. And, we are just polishing, we are removing the dust, and the new truth may come to light. So after this Kartika Amavasya, the question was, is there a evidence within the Mahabharata itself that can do it? And the answer is yes. Although people assumed it, they had not shown any evidence. This is what I showed. For example, if you look at the phases and positions of the moon through the 18 days of the war, and there are some 30 plus different observations. They talk about the moon, or some days they don't talk about the moon at all. Like first 7 days, they don't talk about the moon. Then 8 through the 18 days, they talk about the moon. 12 through 18 days, they talk about the full moon or full moon-like moon. Then they talk about how the war was stopping essentially at the sunset, and how it was a pitch dark. In the evening was pitch dark. Nobody could even discern each other. First day, second day, third day, fourth day. Only after like sixth day, the war sort of continues beyond sunset. The 14th day, the war goes through the night, whole night. And if you go to like a 17th day, the Kaurava army is right on the battlefield. Okay, they don't even go back to their tents. Why? Because it's a day close to Purnima, full moon day. You also get descriptions of specific positions. So on the 12th day, the moon is near Kritika. On the 17th day, the moon is near Punarvasu. All of this tells you that Kartika Amavasya is the first day of the war. Margashirsha month, lunar month, is the is the month of the war, and so on. Now, when we do it, then the next question comes. So I gave a validation for Kartika Amavasya, which is what Vartak has assumed, which many 50+% of Mahabharata researchers also assume. So far so good. I showed the evidence. Arundhati Vasishta showed that the 5561 or 5228 do fall into it. So that's not a problem. Arundhati Vasishta observation is not a problem for them. In fact, it validates their ear. Okay. It doesn't say finally this is the final word. Now, after Kartika Amavasya, now there was another problem that I saw. Remember, I'm telling you this cycle, P1, TT, EE, P2. Now, Vartak ji has claimed 58 days for Bhishma on the bed of arrows. Majority of the Mahabharata researchers claim this. And the people who again don't understand the difference between social consensus, academic consensus versus science, they are opposite of each other. Okay. If there is a consensus, we are not talking of a science. We are not talking of a Shastra. We are not talking of Adhyatma. Okay. If the Adhyatma and Shastra, these are like going above, like Adhyatma is like going above Atma. This is not about goody goody stuff. Okay. Adhyatma is not easy. And so is not, so is science, by the way. So what happens is, where does this mistake comes from? I'm asserting this is a mistake. This is a blunder. Like claiming Bhishma on the bed of arrows only for 58 days is a blunder. But where did it begin? Aditya and I have done an episode on it. This began 400 years ago with Nilakanta Chaturdhar in Kashi. He did a phenomenal work, just like what Bhandarkar Oriental did in last 100 years, creating a critical edition. Now Bhandarkar created critical edition. What Nilakanta Chaturdhar, he was a Maharashtrian Brahmin from Paitan, moved to Kashi, and that's where he was. What he did is he created a comprehensive edition of a Mahabharata, slightly different than critical. He possibly collected every single possible edition he could have his hands on and included. He was more inclusive than exclusive. What critical edition did is exclusive, but also they have done a beautiful job in the sense they have done exclusive, but anything that they did not include, they did not throw it away. That is the scientific acumen. That is the logical reasoning. Okay, they put it in the notes of the critical edition. So 58 days began with a Nilakanta Chaturdhar. I would encourage you to read his. I forgot the name of the book now. Something. Mahabharata Deep or something. So read that. It's of course in Sanskrit, so you need to know Sanskrit if you want to do that. But what he did is anyways, I'll not go into that. There is a whole episode on it. So this is wrong. So Vartak had taken 58 days, and guess what? Why this is a problem? This is a problem for even Vartak's claim of 5561 BC, because Vartak had said Mahabharata war began on 16th of October, which is correct, of 5561 BC. So Bhishma fell on the 10th day, so 25 October. But between the 25th October and Bhishma Nirvana, which is the day of winter solstice in 5561 BC, there are no 58 days. Actually, there is a much longer time period. If you just count from 25th October, 58 days, the day that comes, 22nd of December, that's what confused Dr. Vartak. And he thought, well, in our times, it's around 21st of December. So maybe that's what it was, but that's not correct. Okay. There is a confusion of a calendar that he did. So otherwise he used a Julian calendar, but when taking the day of Bhishma Nirvana, or rather the day of winter solstice, he jumped to a Gregorian calendar date. Even that date is wrong, because if you go back to 5561 BC, it's not 21st December. It comes to 18th December, even in the Gregorian calendar. But leaving the technicalities aside, the 58 days are wrong. Now, what is the problem with this? So I said, well, everything else looks so good for 5561 BC, but not this 58. So I started with this. In fact, I spent like 6 months trying to just solve this problem of 58 days. Adhikamasa, lack of Adhikamasa, Kshayamasa, you name it. And I have considered every single approach. That's what I was doing sometime in 2009, 2010 for 6 months, only on these 58 days. I said, something doesn't make sense. So I had read Mahabharata many times. In my research, I started again. This time, see, you have to have a focus, like this Arjuna story, Arjuna and Dronacharya, like, what do you see? The parrot and the parrot's left eye, and then only you throw the arrow. This time when I'm reading Mahabharata, I'm only focusing on evidence that has to do with the Bhishma Nirvana. And it didn't take me much long once I finally came to that conclusion that I have to read Mahabharata and note down the evidence. First, I found 6+ evidence. When I presented that just very clearly said 58 is a wrong number. The actual number is 92, 95 plus, more than 92, more than 95. I'm not saying 92, I'm not saying 95. More than 92, more than 95. The number of duration between when Bhishma fell down on the 10th day of the war to the day of winter solstice. Then some people raise some objections, which is always a good thing. If the objection is raised in a logical fashion, it leads to growth of knowledge. When acharyas, they are having a vada and vivada, you can say, it leads to growth of knowledge. When people with a very poor intelligence, tamasic vritti, when they get into this, they should be ignored. Okay, they should be avoided like a scorpions because that doesn't lead to growth of knowledge. But when some good objections came, like say, well, if this is so, it was not an objection, it was a ask for a more elaboration. He said, if this is true, then why would that have happened, or is there evidence for this? And you know what, evidence is what it is. Pramana tashyartha pratipatte. If it exists, we can talk about it. If it does not exist, we cannot talk about it. Fortunately, the beauty of a Vyasa's whole composition, the Mahabharata, is such. When I went back, because somebody asked for something, and I said, let me see if there is evidence for it, I found 23 plus. Then somebody asked more questions, I found now 60 plus, and now it's close to 100. Just on the Bhishma Nirvana, the evidence that points to 90 to 95 plus days. Now, once you do this, Vishwa Nirvana, I mean, the winter solstice occurred on 30 January 5560 BC in that year. So 31st, a day after the day of winter solstice, is the day of Bhishma Nirvana. So now we know the Bhishma Nirvana day. Again, it beautifully matches. Okay, so excellent match with all of this. Now, it still doesn't answer. I mean, I jumped and I told you what was the situation for 5561 BCE. But the question is, how did Dr. Vartak arrived at the year 5561 BC? And he had claimed, and there is an element of truth to it, that he used the planetary evidence to arrive at this. Okay. And again, if you want to know more, you have to go and read his book Swayambhu. Okay. And now the English translation of it also exists. To see what kind of planetary positions analysis he did. But I am saying, although it was useful, it was very useful to me, and directionally he was correct, but he also went on a wrong track. Okay, after that. And so, for example, like, when I'm saying this, am I blaspheming? No, blaspheming him? Absolutely not. I consider, actually, last episode, Adityaji, I ended on this note that I don't know any person, living or dead, of last 100 years in an Indic space, in terms of his contribution, originality, just name it. I mean, give all the good attributes you want to give, intensity, tapasya, that can come anywhere close to Dr. Padmakar Vishnu Vartak. Okay, anyone, me included, of course. I mean, I'm just a small piece in compared to what he has done. In spite of it, I'm saying that he was wrong in the planetary evidence. Now, the people of a low intellect immediately think this as if I'm like putting that person down. No, that's not how it works in a Sanatana. You will see again acharyas, one acharya critiquing another, but his or her intent is very different. Okay, the intent is for a growth of a knowledge. And remember, we talked about the Satyam Vachmi, Rutham Vachmi, or a temporary truth. Temporary in the sense of appropriate for a time, place, circumstances. In this case, with a limited information, limited tools that someone like Dr. Vartak had access to, what he did is amazing. Again, I don't know anyone else in last 100 years who has come anywhere close to what he did. Now, so excellent match for AV, Bhishma Nirvana. Everything is going in the favor of 5561 BCE. But how did he come to 5561 BCE? He says planetary evidence, but what I found when I started testing is the planetary evidence, yet Vartak's explanations are neither consistent nor do they match for 5561 BC. Now, you can make a mistake twice and come to the right answer. That's the kind of scenario that has happened there. There are, how much evidence is there? Planetary evidence, 50 plus instances of planetary evidence in Mahabharata. Today's, if you go with any living or dead, other than Vartak, if you go for any other Mahabharata researcher, you will not find anyone dare discuss planetary evidence more than 10. 10 out of 50 people will not dare discuss this. Do you know why? Because if they discuss more than 10, and I'm being very liberal and calling it 10, they can't actually go more than 5. Their claim immediately falls off. So they are going to come up with all kinds of stupid explanations, why they don't consider planetary evidence to be reliable and so on and so forth. Or they will just not talk about it, hope that people don't notice. But social media is changing that game, right? Okay. So what are some of the evidence? Vakri, we see that in case of Mars and Jupiter. Akramya, three times. Vakri we see three times in case of Mars and Jupiter. Akramya we see three times in the case of Saturn and Jupiter. Pidyate we see three instances of it. A retrograde we see four instances with the four different planets. Tiriac motion of Mercury, on and on. All that only can take you to 5561 BCE. And for that, you would have to watch a planetary evidence series that Aditya ji and I did, 6 or 7 episodes, my book, many of my blogs, and my talks. So this is the time period is given. So 16 October to November, one that was decided by Dr. Vartak is validated by me, but not the way Dr. Vartak had claimed the planetary evidence or planetary interpretation. No, that doesn't give. Astronomy evidence is great. Now we ask the question, do we have any terrestrial evidence? Okay. So yeah, celestial equal to terrestrial. That's what Galileo showed. Now, do we see that in case of a Mahabharata? That is the question. Now, if we don't find any terrestrial evidence, this is where there is a something called a logical positivist. Now of course I knew it, and this is to anyone who is doing good science know that this is a dead, actually very dogmatic view that is dead for now 70, 80 plus years. In fact, it will never had a life. Unfortunately, I just recently learned when I was presenting, one archaeologist, he was so proud of it. He said, well, have you heard of the latest cutting edge science called logical or approach, let's say, called logical positivism? And I just said, my God, now I understand why this guy is stuck in utterly dogmatic nonsense. Okay, because he's stuck in logical positivism, but he's thinking that's the latest cutting edge thing. No, it was never a cutting edge thing. This is people who may know philosophy of science, they may have heard about Vienna Circle and so on. And people can go to Google and read more about it. Anyways, the point is, astronomy is giving you one date that is valid on its own. If you want to show that 5561 is not correct, you have to come on the turf of astronomy, and you have to come on the turf of a Mahabharata evidence to show that. Okay, but now, so that people don't do, they just go on a haywire and go on some tangents for a reason, because they cannot touch the Mahabharata evidence. They cannot touch 5561 BC. But now we are going in the growth of knowledge. Now we are asking the question, do we have any terrestrial archaeology type of evidence that supports 5561 BC? Okay, so here we are making a transition from, say, celestial to terrestrial. So I'm taking like a 3 claims there. They all refer to terrestrial evidence. One is flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka. So if based on the Mahabharata evidence and using astronomy as a basis, if we have arrived at 5561 BC using the same Mahabharata evidence, which says Dwarka was flooded and destroyed, Krishna's Dwarka, because Dwarka as a Kushasthali existed for 30, 40,000 plus years. We don't know how long. We are talking Krishna's Dwarka. When was this flooded and destroyed? Mahabharata tells us 36 years after the Mahabharata war. So if 5561 BC is, we have already proved based on astronomy. But now we add the chronology marker from the Mahabharata text that gives us 5525 BC as the new prediction for flooding and destruction of Dwarka. The question is there any evidence? Similarly, P7, the next problem, let's say, the terrestrial problem, a significant and exclusive termination of male population of India, 18 Aukshohini, okay, happens suddenly within a span of 18 days. Okay, around when? 5561 BCE. The question is, do we happen to have any evidence, any footprint of that, what you can say, genetic catastrophe, okay, into the population dynamics of India or the surrounding area near India or the world? Okay, why world? Because then we have to bring another one, which is to say there were many outward migrations from India. Okay, but we'll not even go there. Similar problem is that the state of river Saraswati. Why is this? Saraswati is on the ground, and there are 100 plus descriptions of river Saraswati in the Mahabharata text. Balarama's Tirtha Yatra, even before, when Pandavas are going through the Vanavas, they are roaming around in the area of Saraswati with many Rishi, like a Lomash Rishi, Markandeya Rishi, Dhaume Rishi, and many. So the descriptions of river Saraswati from Mahabharata, do they match for 5561 BC? So these are like a three new terrestrial problems we have taken. And do we have evidence to match it for 5561 BC? Let's say that is the question. And so let's go one by one there. So yes, did I type this same thing? Yeah, okay. So astronomy evidence is great, but do we have terrestrial? Specifically, we are looking at the flooding and destruction of Dwarka. And the answer is yes, there is an impressive, detailed, precise, and accurate evidence of massive flooding, massive tsunamis, sea level rise, sudden sea level rise in 5525 BCE, the predicted year for the flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka. And this evidence comes from around the world. What are some of the places? It comes from Dwarka itself, the west coast of India. It comes from Pumpuhar, the east coast of India. It comes from Aceh Banda, okay, the western part of Indonesia. Amazing evidence. Great Barrier Reef of Australia, Black Sea in the Turkey. Okay, the Black Sea formation happened in 5525 BC. If you go to West Indies, Barbados, and then 7 different locations besides Barbados, you find very clean, crisp, clear evidence of a sudden rise of 6.5 meters in 5525 BCE. If you go to the area between Scotland and Norway, Dogger Bank, UK, that area, you find sudden evidence for sea level rise in 5525 BC. If you go to the east coast of Maine, there is evidence of that in that time. Very impressive evidence, okay? So yes, the answer is that is true. Now, we discussed 3 terrestrial problems. So let's go to the second one. What about this fact that suddenly 18 Aukshohini, exclusive male population, was destroyed, eliminated, terminated in 18-day time period in 5561 BC? That is the claim, right? Now, do you see any footprint of that? Now, remember again, we may ask for evidence, doesn't mean we will always get it. We should be thankful when we get it. Many people miss this point, and they will say when they get evidence, they get more demanding. Now, can you show me the evidence for this? Hey, just because you ask doesn't mean the evidence may exist, and it is not somebody else's responsibility to create the evidence for you. Out of their compassion, krupopeksha, okay, out of their krupa, out of their compassion, somebody may work on it and may bring it to educate you. It's something not you can demand. That's why Krishna again talks in Bhagavad Gita, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. Do you have a shraddha? Do you have a humbleness? Do you understand how much effort and tapasya it takes to generate evidence, to search for evidence, to put the 2 and 2 together, triangulate, quadrangulate? When people don't understand, they think it's their birthright. No, you don't have any rights. You only have a responsibility, and you may be smashed at any point in time. You have no rights. Rights come from this respectful integration, and therefore Bhagavad Gita, but also Nyaya Darshana and other darshanas, they will say, you know what, you should know who to even have a vada with, who to have a vivada with, who to have a samvada with. Some people are incapable, incompetent. You don't hold vad, or you don't hold samvad, you don't hold discussion with them. So be very careful when you ask for evidence. Stand in front of a mirror, ask yourself the question, what have you done? If you haven't done anything, you have no right to ask the questions, okay? So astronomy evidence is great. We were talking about the second aspect, 18 Aukshohini, which amounts to 4 million men, suddenly being terminated, dead in 18 days. Is there any, this is a genetic earthquake, you can say. Is there any evidence of that? Again, we cannot demand, but we can look for it. And if by luck, Daivam Chaivatra Panchamam, we may find it. In this case, we are lucky. Forgive the typo there. We have evidence coming from 2 sources. One is a physical anthropology. This is a work of Professor Kennedy. He passed away around 2012 or so. I had a fortune of communicating with him through email and otherwise. He was at Cornell University. He has done a lot of work in India, has published many books, and I would encourage you to check the name and read them. What he showed, and this is evidence, I want to tell you something about this evidence, by the way, but I'll tell you the politics of this evidence. What he showed is that if there is any discontinuity among the Indian population, okay, based on the physical anthropology, the craniometrics and non-cranial type of analysis they did from the excavated bodies that they found in whichever place they found in India, and which could be dated, of course. What he showed, this is a paper of Hemphill, Lucas, and Kennedy. These are peer-reviewed papers for those who are stuck in the dogma of peer-reviewed journals. Okay, what he showed is that if there is any discontinuity, let's say we go back before 1000 BC, because nobody is saying Mahabharata happened after that. So I'll just use that, because there is another discontinuity between I think 800 BC, I forgot the exact number, and 200 BC, or between 200 BC and 500 CE. Let's not worry about that. But the one discontinuity among the human population of India, the Indian subcontinent we are talking here, which means what, from Iran all the way to Indonesia kind of landscape, that occurs, or in the evidence it shows up between 6000 BC and 4500 BC. If there is any discontinuity, and it's a relatively weak evidence, and I'm going to come to the politics of this evidence in a minute. Well, guess what? What is possible reason for that discontinuity? We don't know, but if we have to guess, it very likely the Mahabharata event that happened 5561 BC. As I said, this is a very weak evidence. Okay. Now the politics of it. Many Indic researchers are so proud to use this evidence to make their case, not for the Mahabharata war year, but for other things, like to show how Aryan invasion theory did not happen, many other things, or that we had a civilization going back to 8,000 years and so on. They use this evidence. Okay. They talk about these changes. Guess what? And they say, how strong is this evidence? When I use that same evidence to show how it beautifully corroborates 5561 BCE as the year of Mahabharata war in the context of the changes in the human dynamics, anthropology of the human population in India, they shut their mouth. Then this becomes a non-evidence. Okay. And if you watch social media, if you read in social media, you will see the evidence of that and who these people are. But let's move on. The second more powerful evidence, very strong evidence, comes from Monica Carmine. Okay, 2015 paper. A significant change of ratio, female to male diversity. If you go on the absolute scale, 16:1. If you go on a relative scale, 5:1. And that perfectly matches with the population estimates of 6 millennium BC and how many mains were gone, which is 4 million. And that creates a ratio of 5:1 in India, by the way. And that is the ratio you see in Monica Carmine's paper. Monica Carmine's paper looks at the global data, but the epicenter is India. The timing is 7,500 years ago, 5561 BCE. And as I said, the epicenter is India. The ratio is this, beautifully matches. Okay, this is our second after Dwarka, the terrestrial evidence. Okay, India and epicenter followed by west of India and east of India effects. Timing of the above two, the epicenter as well as the ratio going back to 5561 BC. The third one that we had was astronomy evidence. Again, we talked about, but the second, the terrestrial one, is the river Saraswati descriptions. Okay, and what do we find? We have to take a bigger view to understand the importance of how Saraswati was behaving during the Mahabharata time, 6 millennium BC. How impressive is the river Saraswati evidence? Like papers as recent as 2020, James Blinkhorn, okay? And going back to work of Padma Shri Haribabu Wakankar, going back to 100 years or so now, okay? What the evidence shows us that river Saraswati was there for a very long time. We now have evidence of it flowing for a 200,000 plus years. We also have evidence of Saraswati shifting from, think of like a further southward to going towards north, 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 and finally changing direction. A significant change from 200K to 70K, it was in one place, but 70K suddenly a significant change. Then we have additional change of Yamuna separating from Saraswati and meeting Ganga around 50,000. Then the last glacial maximum, LGM, hits beginning with say 35,000, 40,000 BC to 20,000 is like a peak. Okay. And after, so now Saraswati shrunk because most of the water is frozen in the Himalayas. Okay. Not enough water is coming because of the glacial maximum, colder temperatures. Now it starts warming up. And now by that time, some different changes have taken place. So the Saraswati has the grand Saraswati of Rigveda is not there after 20,000. Okay. Still Saraswati is very grand, but not the grand Saraswati of Rigveda. Now what happens in 13,000 BCE, 15,000 years ago, Satlaj, the other big river, big tributary to Saraswati, uh, starts turning west and goes westward. So now Saraswati is shrinking. Vinashan is formed very soon after that. Okay. Therefore, in 12,000 BC in the Ramayana times, Saraswati is not the biggest river. It is still river, fast flowing river. Description comes, but it's not the biggest river. Actually, Ganga has become big river. You can see why. Why? Because Yamuna is now meeting Ganga. You see Sindhu as a big river. Okay. Why? Because Satlaj is now meeting Ganga. Okay. So those are the points. Now comes 7.5K, like time of Mahabharata. Something else happened. So if river Saraswati is getting smaller and smaller, now why there are descriptions of river Saraswati in Mahabharata where it is flowing beautifully in some places? Because of the intensification of monsoon. That is the research work of Anindya Sarkar. And those are some of the studies that I had mentioned. Again, Saraswati evidence beautifully matches. Okay. Now, what else? Astronomy, hydrology, oceanography, anthropology, genetics. This is what I'm covering here. This evidence is great. Now, some people, again, because they don't get it. Now, if this is out of a good curiosity in the sense of a guru shishya, tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam, then this is useful. Because the guru, just like a Bhrugu Varuni Vidya, somebody asks, then Guru will say, go and study this. And yeah, you are passionate about this, go study, do research, bring out the information and tell me what you found. That's what Varuna did to Bhrugu. Varuna did not give ready-made spoon-fed answers. Okay, that's the beauty of a Upanishad. That's what Upanishad is trying to teach us. If you feel passionate about something, don't just lazily ask questions. That's a tamas of a highest kind. Okay, go do something yourself. Does textual evidence of ancient Indian narratives corroborate this 5560 of BC? Again, Aditya and myself have done an episode on this. Answer is absolutely yes. Okay, if it is occurred in 5561 BC, do we have a chronology or what you call genealogy evidence to support this? The answer is yes. Okay, for example, can we connect this with Ramayana? Can we connect this with Rigveda through genealogy? The answer is yes. Ramayana, like you have 40 generations. These are only important kings mentioned. Not every king is mentioned. From say Brahma all the way to Rama. And from Rama to Mahabharata, again, prominent 28 kings are mentioned. The 20th king from Rama is a Bruhadbal of a Koshala and Dirgha Yajna of Ayodhya. Okay, they both are Ikshvaku kings at 28th royal generation, which means not to be taken literally human generations. Only prominent kings are mentioned. They fought from a Kaurava side and they both were killed. Okay, that information is there in the Mahabharata and you can connect that. The descriptions of Ramayana comes all the time in the Mahabharata. Ramopakyan is there, but Ramayana is well known in Mahabharata times in such a way that when the warriors are fighting with each other, they are quoting from Ramayana. How beautiful. And if you go to Rigveda, the last portion, because Vyasa of the Mahabharata time edited, recasted Rigveda. That's how you see Shantanu Devapi, right? And you also see a description of river Sindhu. River Sindhu as a big river now. If you look at the pure genealogy evidence of the Puranas, okay, so now you cannot just take one Purana. You have to take it all Purana evidence. Once you jump into Purana, you have to take all Purana evidence. You jump into Mahabharata, you have to take all Mahabharata evidence. That is science. Okay, that is basically Darshana Shastra. That is logical. That is scientific. Okay, and that is something one must understand with common sense. You cannot be selective. You cannot be arbitrary. If you do that, what do you find? Puranas are giving different estimates from 1050 to 115, 1500, 3110 between Nanda, which is a Chanakya's time, and Parikshita. If you do the estimate for the Nanda's time, which also varies from 2300 BC to 300, you combine this, it tells you that Mahabharata war, just based on the genealogy evidence, could have happened anywhere from 1300 BCE to 5600 BCE. Now, the simple point is this evidence cannot be ever decisive, but you ask the question, does 5561 falls into it? Yes, of course it does, right? That is how it is corroborating it. Okay, let's see. So now just two more. If some people say if Ramayana occurred before Mahabharata, do we see evidence of Ramayana in Mahabharata? The answer is yes. And not vice versa. Yeah, that is also the answer is yes. You find references of Ramayana in Mahabharata, you do not find the references of Mahabharata in the Ramayana. Now, some people go further. Okay, again, if you ask in the right Guru Shishya style, then it has a value. Because be aware, when you're asking it to Guru or Guru-like person, the Guru, just like in a Bhrugu Varuni style, the Guru, Varuna, will ask his Shishya Bhrugu to go and do tapasya, not always give a spoon-fed answer. Okay. Do we have evidence-based dating of Ramayana before Mahabharata? Now, whether we have a Ramayana dating before Mahabharata or not is immaterial. The very fact Ramayana references are in Mahabharata, but Mahabharata references are in not Ramayana is sufficient to answer that. Fortunately, again, we are lucky here. Yes, we do have an independent dating of Ramayana, which I have shown 12,209 BC. So you see, you can keep on asking questions to grow your knowledge, to make sense of the things, and it by luck, by tapasya, okay, you may be getting that information. But there is no guarantee of this. That is the point I'm emphasizing. Now, Mahabharata states that Vyasa edited, recasted Rigveda during Imbi times. Do we have any evidence of this? Re-editing or recasting of Rigveda during Mahabharata times? Yes, tons of evidence. I'll just give you a couple of points here. If you go to Rigveda and Sukta, there is a Sukta related to Shantanu and Devapi. I think it's a 10.93, 10.98, I think. Shantanu and Devapi. Now, Shantanu is the father of Bhishma. Devapi is Shantanu's brother. Sorry, yeah, correct. Shantanu's brother. And there was one more. Adityaji, I don't know if you remember the name. It starts with B, I think. Devapi, Shantanu, and there was one more. The name is not coming to me. Three brothers. Devapi went to the forest. He became like a Adhyatmic person. Shantanu became the king. That information is there in the 10th Sukta, 10th Mandala of Rigveda. And that is because Vyasa is editing it. Okay, but something more. I mean, there can be many references. I'm just giving one more. Nadi Sukta 10.75. And if you read it, and I will encourage people, don't be lazy, go there, read it, read the translation multiple times. What you will see is, yes, of course, 19 rivers are mentioned, including Saraswati and others, beautifully. And in the sequence that you will see, starting from the east, going towards the west, the direction of migration, and not the stupid claim of Aryan invasion nonsense. But this particular sukta also talks about how Sindhu is now the big river. Now, I told you, by Mahabharata times, actually even by Ramayana times, but especially Mahabharata times, because Ramayana times, what happened, even when Satlaj turned sharp west, the land, if you see the land in the Haryana and Rajasthan and Punjab area, it's a very flat land, and rivers can change their paths very, very fast. So therefore, although it turned west at Ropar or Rupnagar, it was actually creating multiple different distributaries, and the water was actually many times coming to Saraswati again in a different locations, not the same location. Therefore, the name of Satlaj is also called Shutudri or Shatudri, with hundreds of currents. That is because of that reason. But by the time you come to Mahabharata, this Satlaj has very nicely attained the flow all the way going westward and eventually meeting Sindhu. So Sindhu has become a prominent river now, and that's what you see into the Nadi Sukta. How beautiful. So the geography, hydrology, morphodynamics of rivers, geophysics, geochemistry, guys, all this evidence is coming together and corroborating that 5561 BC. I think this must be my last one. Yeah. So that's how what I want to show you is the path of science or path of Adhyatma. There is no difference in the Indian context, whereas in Europe, they're totally separated. Religion versus science was the war. Here, there is no question of a war. They are the same if understood in the proper fashion. That was not the case for Western Europe, unfortunately. Therefore, there was no question of they being happy and comfortable together. Okay, one was using an extremely dogmatic approach, not willing to give this up, and the other being the science, was using only very reductionist approach. Okay, the both have some truth in it. Okay, there is even in the myth, so-called myth, there is a truth hidden in it, and even in the reductionist approach of science, it is fascinating enough that it can be very useful, as we have found with our all technology and whatnot. But the synthesis, and now we have to use the word synthesis because of this Western fun that they did for what, how many thousand years or so, or 500 years. That was never a problem in India. Again, those people who have access to Marathi, I would encourage people to read Amrutanubhav. Again, a beautiful tradition of a Purva Paksha. But he will first say the importance of a Shabda, and then he will say why Shabda is not required. Jnaneshwara, Similarly, you will see here the challenge we have, like synthesis, we are using the word, but that synthesis is not required in the Indian context, at least the original Indian context. By original, I mean at a very fundamental level. When we confuse what science is, when we confuse what Adhyatma is, then yes, of course, just like a West, we have to also talk about the synthesis and why they need to be brought together, understood in a proper fashion, and so on. So with that, Adityaji, I'm going to stop sharing. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Nilesh. Like, very wonderful presentation as usual. One thing which really struck me, and I'll ask you a little bit away from what you presented, I was listening to it very attentively, is that when we talk about the Adhyatma, generally people think Adhyatma means reading, and I call it the derived realization. Swadhyaya is something which you practice, like on yourself, like for example, mantra japa, or some yoga asana, and then some breathing exercises, pranayam. So how does that impact in building an analytical mind?
Good question. For example, we know now the effect of exercise on our mind. I mean, we always knew it, but we may not have named it. Ayurveda might have known it, but Ayurveda is not my expertise. But for example, when you just do exercise, immediately the certain hormones in your body come. We know the effect of nutrition. Okay, so what is that? Ayurveda calls, what is it? Pancha Kriya or something, it just talks about. So nutrition, we know certain ingredients, if we don't get it, our brain doesn't think the right way. Certain things are not produced. If we don't get good sleep, there are wonderful studies like people are deprived of REM sleep. Actually, they do these all kinds of very interesting studies. As soon as the person goes in a sleep lab, person goes in REM, they wake him up. Okay, again they will make that person sleep, but if the person goes in REM, the rapid eye movement, they will make that person wake up. If you are deprived of it, so REM during the night is basically reorganizes your brain. So my point is that yama, dama, swadhyaya, all that you do, sleeping on the right time, doing good exercise, doing the japa, tapa, all of this is actually necessary to retain, but to improve your intellect. That's why, the Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna. So Shraddha you begin, but if you just stay there, bhai, mere paas Shraddha hai, I don't need to do anything, then in a way you can be doomed. I mean, Shraddha may barely save you, okay, merely just preserve you. So to answer your question, all of these are required to increase it. Okay, if you already have it, that's a good news. But if you don't do it, it's like a atrophy. You say if you don't do the exercise, the muscle is going to get worse and worse. So yeah, it is very much required. That's a tapasya. That's why we hear brahmacharya and samyak jnana and all of this. And so we have a mano vak buddhi. Okay, so we have a body, we have a mind, and we have an intellect. We need nutrition, we need exercise, we need tapasya for all three. So therefore you read, but you also do japa, you also do work in the outdoor, you go, so you have to do all of this to get this.
Thank you so much, Nilesh. Wonderful presentation. This was part 3. And do watch it and let us know your feedback. Truth Science, part 1, Adhyatma part 2, then Samshaya, and then this one. Do comment and let us know your feedback. And most importantly, share it widely. and we will be happy to answer your question. Nilesh sometimes answers on the channel also, so you can ask him question there. It has to be relevant. I'll tell you one story. Nahush and Yudhishthir. Nahush wanted to ask few questions to Yudhishthir. Yudhishthir said, if I know that you know the topic, then I'll answer it.
Hmm.
So there was a pre-qualification for answering a question also. So thank you so much for joining, and namaste, and have a wonderful evening or day.